Welcome all. I'm just going to let people get to their seats, please. Welcome all to the Infrastructure Services Committee. We've got a public forum today. We've got two presentations. So the first one is from Chris Timms on behalf of the Daisy... What is it? Is Chris here? Hi, Chris. Daisy Link Garden Centres, sorry. I knew it was... Apologies, Hilary, I've started without you. Just... Yeah. Now, Chris, the process here is that the floor is yours. You've got 5 minutes to present, and then we follow with questions, if we've got any. Hope that's all okay?
That sounds fine.
Great, thank you.
Perfect. I do have some written versions
Great.
of my submission. I'll send
Thanks,
those around.
Lynn.
Yeah.
We'll start your 5 minutes now.
Perfect. So the context of the application is quite clear. Wiles Plant Land, which is run by Daisy Link Garden Centres Limited, is looking to establish a wastewater connection to the Mosgiel infrastructure. I presume you have seen the application, you may not have. Perfect. So Daisy Link operates a cafe, the Topiary Cafe, some of you may be familiar with it, a plant nursery and associated activities on its property. They actually anticipate some activities in the future, including a maze and children's playground. All of their current wastewater discharge is to ground via septic tanks. The cafe is the primary reason that a connection is sought. The cafe is well established, it's an icon to the area, very popular, and is actually an asset to Mosgiel. The popularity of the cafe is really the reason that I'm here today. In terms of policy, I recognise that the council does not actually have a wastewater bylaw regulating servicing and connections at the moment. The new reticulated services policy and its amendment, the out-of-zone water connections amendment, do provide some guidance. The policy states that generally the provision of wastewater and stormwater services will follow similar supply area restrictions to the water supply area restrictions. And out-of-zone connections were considered again in 2013, but that was in relation to water only. The framework's not clear, but it's accepted that the council will grant connection applications when there is a demonstrable need, and we think there is one here. As mentioned, wastewater currently discharges to ground. It occurs in a groundwater protection zone, groundwater protection zone B. I appreciate that that's a low risk zone according to the regional council, but we think that if the discharge can be avoided, then it should be. Also, the site is currently rated for a commercial drainage connection, even though none exists. This suggests that such a connection was anticipated for this property, or is at least appropriate. Prior to finalising their application, Daisy Link did work with the council. We consulted with the Wastewater Services Asset Strategy team. This was to ensure that we could cover any issues off at the outset and try to resolve them. We've tried hard to do that. A number of issues were raised by that team, the two main concerns being capacity issues and septicity issues. I think the capacity issue is recognised in the latest version of the district plan that's been notified. We engaged Derek Railton. He's an expert at Fluent Solutions, who you may be aware of. He's an expert in this field, and there's correspondence from him attached to the back of my submissions. He considered that all the concerns could be resolved, and he identified actually how that could happen. We don't think there's any technical issues that prevent you from granting the application, contrary to what is in the council report. If we do connect, we're still likely to require a conditional trade waste consent, and that's to authorise the actual discharge coming out. Conditional trade waste consents allow the council to place conditions on the discharge, as you'll be aware, and so that gives you management control of the technical issues. So there is a way for you to control that subsequent to this point. Cafes require resource consent under the plan. A precedent issue has been raised. It's quite common in these sorts of applications. They'll also require resource consent under the proposed 2GP at the moment, as notified. The second generation plan actually contains quite strong provisions against commercial activities in the rural zone, and cafes are neither anticipated nor common. They're not dotted around the Tairi. Nonetheless, one does exist here. We think the application really needs to be viewed in that context. The property is unique. Most of the activities on the site are consented, and as far as I'm aware, it's the only activity of its type in the region, and it is certainly the only one served by a septic tank in the groundwater protection zone. As the majority of activities aren't permitted, granting a wastewater connection is not going to lead to some uncontrollable precedent effect, as has been suggested. On the whole, we're aware that the Council's preference is to avoid ad hoc connections. We think that preference can be disregarded here. Due to the nature of the activity, you're not going to create an undesirable precedent in our view, and the fact that your planning framework is quite strong against further activities of this type being established in the rural zone. The groundwater protection zone is well defined, we're in it, and the risk of significant commercial development in this area is quite low also. As a last point, we also think that the cafe is really a public facility. I appreciate it's privately held, owned and operated, but it's used by the public, and we think that servicing these types of facilities over the groundwater protection zone by way of a septic tank and a discharge to ground is also really an adverse precedent there. So in summary, we'd like to connect, or DaisyLink would like to connect, and we think we've got the site that's appropriate to do this. Yeah, sure.
Look, I've got two questions. One relates to a statement, not in your submission per se, but in the documentation, that the cafe received resource consent to double in size, and that resulted in a doubling of the discharge.
Correct.
Well, is it correct? I don't see a necessary relationship between doubling in size and doubling the discharge. If I double the size of my store, I'd love to think I would double my customers. I think it most unlikely. What I will do is enable me to cope with peaks, but that's not nearly the same statement as doubling the discharge. So what's the evidence that the discharge has actually been doubled?
We do have some monitoring from 2014. That's not attached here. The advice I have is that the amount of effluent coming into the system has approximately doubled from when the consent was first granted.
So, well, can I just be very careful here? Is the advice you've had that the amount of effluent coming into the system has doubled, or that the size of the cafe has doubled and therefore the amount of effluent has doubled?
My understanding is that they are correspondent. So the size of the cafe has doubled, and this has also led to an increase in effluent.
Right. But you haven't provided any data to back that
No,
statement
sorry,
up?
I don't have that with me.
Right. So if in fact it hadn't doubled but had increased by 10%, for example, would that change the need for this?
It may, but what we're asking for is the connection. We do have a capacity issue in terms of the volume, but that can be controlled through the trade waste provisions. I take your point that there may only be a small increase as a result of the cafe numbers increasing. I'm sorry I don't have that data, but that is my instruction.
Okay. My second question relates to the precedent issue. The suggestion seems to be that because you've been allowed to do something unusual, that therefore proves that it's unlikely that somebody else would be allowed to do something unusual. And I'm just not quite sure how that logic follows either.
Well, we've been granted consent for a cafe. Someone else feasibly could be granted consent for a cafe. I'm not saying they wouldn't be.
But it isn't just about a cafe, is it? Precedent isn't about a cafe providing precedent for another cafe. It's about a consented, an allowance to put infrastructure into discharge in the way in which you wish, providing precedent for somebody else, regardless of whether they're a cafe or any other activity, frankly, isn't it?
Yes, well, we're saying that this site stands out because it is a cafe.
Okay.
There's been some concern raised by our staff about your proposal to respond to the flow monitor and network and those issues by your proposal to have either a time-based, like overnight only, or a discharge of a constant steady flow. The concerns that seem to be there from our end about that is that we may not be able to stop you discharging during a storm, which would cause an issue, and that we couldn't check that you were doing what we said you could do without us going out and pairing up your kilt at frequent intervals or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Have you got a response to how we could be sure, if we said you could, that you'd then be doing what we said? Of course you'd be trying to. There's no question about that. But for us to know you would, and that we could tell you were.
Well, I must confess that this is getting into the area of technical expertise that Derek Railton's covered. So he suggested two systems, one being the timer-controlled discharge. Now, short of the council being happy with the way the timer works, or perhaps DaisyLink keeping records or reporting to the council, I'm not sure how else that would be monitored. The SCADA system, which has been also suggested, my understanding is that sends a signal to the discharge arrangements in place at the site and tells it when to go through. So presumably the council has that system and is comfortable with it, so I cannot see why it wouldn't be appropriate to use that.
So I'm just thinking with phones and electronics and all sorts of things now, you can usually tell any system you like to tell on itself, tell other people what it's doing or things. Well, is there any ability in either of those systems to say that they're working or not working, or?
I can't answer that question. I don't know myself. I think there will be, but that is a technical issue that we're more than happy to work through with council staff should a connection application be granted. I suspect that those issues will arise as part of the Tradeways consent discharge.
I think that's a question that councillor can give to the staff when we come to debate that issue. Yeah. Is that all the questions, Councillor Calvert? Councillor Benson-Pope? Next.
Thank you. In your comments, you made the comment that most of the activities on the site are consented. What are the ones that aren't consented?
I think there's some ancillary retail related to the garden centre. There's a nursery out on the site.
Should have a consent and doesn't, you're saying?
It's existing use rights, I believe.
Well, it's just that the comment that was made suggests there are unconsented activities that require a consent, and I just want to check that I haven't misunderstood that.
Yeah, that's not my suggestion. All the activities on the site are either permitted existing use rights or consented, so they are all lawful.
That's fine, that's not what you said, that's right.
Councillor Van Vis?
I had the same question put a little differently. I was just wondering what other activities would be contributing significantly to the outflow other than the enlarged cafe?
There's a couple of toilets that are related to the shops on site, the staff, but that's it. There's going to be members of the public coming out and using. There's a mini golf course out there at the moment. There's a small train that goes around. Naturally, they might use the bathroom, but DaisyLink finds that the majority is coming from cafe use.
There's no dairy farm outflow?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris, you mentioned in your submission that the popularity of the cafe for Mosgiel and Dunedin people is largely the reason why the applications become necessary. But in your submission, you claim that most of the visitors come from the Mosgiel catchment, and insofar as they're not using the toilets at home at the time they're using them at the cafe, it will make no difference to the quantum in the system at any one time. Now, I find those a bit inconsistent. You're saying it's growing, it's popular with Dunedin people, and yet
Yes.
in another context you say, well, actually it's only Mosgiel people that go there.
Yeah.
So surely its popularity will lead to more growth, more use, more discharge, which could further risk whatever system is put in.
I don't disagree with that statement. It's hard to quantify. If you're pulling the wool over your eyes to say, well, everyone's coming to the cafe, it's coming from Mosgiel.
Well, that's pretty much what the earlier submission said, actually, but anyway. That any additional people would be inconsequential, but anyway, far away.
Yes, we can't say for certain what proportion comes from Mosgiel, what proportion comes from Dunedin, but we anticipate that the majority of them coming from Mosgiel.
And do you anticipate that the majority of growth will also come from the Mosgiel area?
It's hard to say.
Right, thank you. The other thing I wanted to clarify was in your submission today, you say that the wastewater discharge occurs in the groundwater protection zone B, but in your original submission, or application, sorry, it mentions groundwater zone A.
That's a typo, it's B.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Thompson?
I'm just wanting to understand what has driven the application. Is it sorry, I'll go back a step. When the cafe was originally granted consent with the lower number of patrons, there was an assurance was given there was no problems with a ground-based disposal system, and now apparently there is. Is the problem technical in the sense that it is not possible to continue to use a ground-based disposal system for whatever reason, or is it financial, that there would be a cost associated with upgrading the ground-based disposal methodology?
There's always going to be a way to upgrade the ground-based disposal system. But you're correct, that's a question of cost. At this stage, for a number of reasons, including issues around the upgrade, we think that the connection to the wastewater scheme is the stronger option.
It's the stronger option for your client in terms of cost, yeah. Right.
I don't have the numbers,
Well, given that you may be, well, we're getting a credit back on drainage rates, I might cover it. But I've got a question. And just when the 2014 land use consent to increase the size of the cafe, did it double the size of the toilets on site? Well, and that goes to the point that one isn't necessarily intrusive to the other. So just thank you for that clarity. I just want to understand better the alternative methodology. Now, there's a substantial site out there that gives, one would presume, a substantial area to put new technology or an extension to the disposal system. Is it partly difficult to do that because of the other developments in the area, like the entertainment factors that are being developed continually out there? Or you may not know that.
I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you. And the last question I have, you gave this as quite an exception, saying that there aren't any other cafes there, and I'm just trying to understand that distinguish when there's 2 cafes in Outram on a ground protected area, there's a number of golf clubs that have high substantial uses out on the Taieri, how you see this as so different. Because that's what you're saying, this is an exception, but we've got golf clubs, I think there's about 4 out there that have reticulated systems for quite substantial numbers. And there's definitely 2 in cafes, one may not provide toilets, I don't know, in Outram, which are ground protected areas. I just want you to pare down why this one's exceptional.
I must confess, I not aware of how it is Outram.
Okay. It's not particular sewage. No. Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you. Councillor McTavish.
Thank you. Just one question, and that is in relation to the septic systems on site. Have you detected problems with them, or is it simply that you know that they have reached capacity?
We know that they're close to reaching capacity in our activities.
Right. And second question, have you put, or has Wells installed low flow water systems or water saving devices in any of its facilities?
I'm not sure, but if they haven't, I'm sure they can investigate.
Thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, Chris, look, I must confess that I don't know if there's much difference between a Dunedin resident and a Mosgiel resident using the facility because all the sewage goes to the same place. There are definitely people like me that would use it and are on a septic tank, so that would be a contribution. Not that I go there much, but the question I want to ask is, I see in the plan it says that you're prepared to relay 350 to 400 metres of pipe, of which 24 metres will be gifted to the DCC. So can I take from that that means that all the pipe inside the boundary you'll take responsibility of, and to the is that what you're saying? And that there's 24 metres from your boundary to where you can connect in? Yep. Now, the next question is that you're talking about a system that will deliver sewage to the system at 1 litre per second, so 60 litres a minute, so 2,500 litres a day. Is there any, have you made any inquiries of whether there is capacity in the scheme once you get there to do that? Is that, that's the question I don't know. Is
Mosgiel scheme.
Well, the Mosgiel scheme's the town scheme, but, you know, if you put enough people into a pipe, you do eventually get to a stage where it reaches capacity.
We understand there is capacity for that, so long as we manage the flows appropriately.
Yep.
Which is why we have the low flow rates, or we're proposing to discharge it early out.
Yeah. One of the problems, see, I actually generally support these things. One of the problems I have is that in June, when we had the floods, there was a lot of sewage coming up onto the streets in Carlisle Road and Bush Road and Tyne Street. And perhaps not Bush Road, sorry, Carlisle Road, Tyne Street, down the bottom end. And that's something that those people are really, really unhappy about. And anything that goes in further might be a real risk to them, because that was where it will go. It will go straight down Carlisle Road to the pumping station.
We understand that the scheme is operating at high capacity, that's why there's some generation and it does have the infrastructure constraint on it.
Yeah.
But our advice is that we will manage our flows within the capacity that's available, so we don't cause that risk.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask, if this were granted and you managed your flows, what would be the expectation if the custom at your cafe doubled again? Would you expect to be able to increase the flows or increase the pipe, having set a precedent?
Well, we will be limited by the trade licence that's granted, and that will specify flows and volume.
So how is that different from the agreement that was made or the acknowledgement that was made when the cafe first went in that it could be managed on site. And yet now the applicant is changing their view on that and saying, well, it shouldn't be. We don't want to use we want to use a pipe. How's that different from saying, well, we want to use a pipe and we won't make that any bigger? Why would we expect that won't change as well when the business flourishes and more people need to use it?
Well, I can't predict what's going to happen in 5 years' time, but let's say that did happen, we have to come back before the council again and try to vary our trade waste consent or the size of the pipe or the connection of it.
Thank you.
Just reading through Derek Relton's report here, item 2. The use of base value of 25 litres per person per day usage and 114 patrons. Well, that doesn't stack up in my book because you're going to have revolving patrons, they're not permanent on site. So it doesn't mention anywhere here of the amount of customers expected through the CAF. And that would make the difference to your flow.
Yeah, it doesn't mention that here, but you'll see that Derek's estimated what we anticipate peak flows will be. So
yeah, so that should be calculated on the amount of customers going through the shop, not on a 25 litre per person per day, which must be a calculation for permanent staff.
I can't comment on
because the facts stated here don't stack up to a retail shop where the customer's turning over, because when you get to the likes of the flood that we had quite recently in June, there wouldn't be a large amount of customers going into the shop to buy plants and stuff in the CAF to a normal warm day.
Yeah, so the discharge...
It's going to fluctuate up and down.
It fluctuates.
Yeah,
It's naturally higher.
just the calculations he has used just doesn't stack up to me.
Well, he's got the base flow.
Yep.
But then
Oh, the base flow, I understand the base flow.
peaks.
Yep.
So
But
that's
the calculation he's used must be a permanent staff calculation. No, yep.
I think that's all the questions. Thank you, Chris. I need to move a motion that we extend this past the half hour from starting. Thank you for seconding that, Councillor Hawkins. That's just a technical thing that we have to do. So you're fine to go. Thanks, Chris. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Leonard and Connor, thank you for... sorry about keeping you here for so long. You can tell that we've got an engaged and councillors wanting to ask questions of you. No, the drill, it's 5 minutes to present your case and then we will, no doubt, ask more questions of you. Welcome.
Thank you. First up, Leonard's going to speak for about four minutes or so, and then I've just got about
trying to make it 3.
3 minutes, and then I've got about a minute. So that's our agenda.
Keep pushing it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you want this better. Dear Chair, dear Mayor, and all the councillors, thank you very much to bring me here to give everybody a little bit of update of my project down the Carry. So after City Council, granted the resource concern for that project, so I am working hard, all my team's working hard to follow up. So currently, the big step is we already signed up the contract for first 2 buildings. Number 1 is we call a management building, which is my main one, plus the first guest accommodation. The contract has been signed up on last Wednesday. The building cost, roughly $1.6 million. So we are trying to get these 2 started first. That's showing on the resource concern as this stage 1. So it's in the very front of the the site, yeah, in the yard. So what I'm trying to say is, I read the DCC's report regarding to this application for connection to the main sewage piping system, about the advantages and the disadvantages. So my point is, number one, I'm trying to claim, say, so DCC is red carpet for investment to the city. So it's any project over $1 million, which certainly I meet that criteria. So so the whole project, when the whole, I mean, after stage 3, I mean, the whole project will looking for around $8 million, I believe. So these first 2 buildings, I mean, 1.6, that's building only, not including any costs for infrastructure like the updating the water or wastage, or I'm trying to do the solar power for on-site as well. So there's a lot of more costs coming in. So, and the number 2, I'm trying to clarify it. So this project, it's not a normal rural site development or nothing to do with the residential development, but purely as a high-end, I mean, a tourist lodge or tourist accommodation. So so that's why I'm trying to keep the highest standard of which I can achieve. So the target for the clients, for the customers, is top end visitors. I mean, including somebody which I always host and I will keep hosting. So Chris, David knows, and when the Chinese ambassadors or consulate general come here, I'm always hosting for them. So the ability for discharge the waste on site is possible, which has been mentioned when we apply for a resource consent, as well as another option, so connect to the mains. Well, lucky. So I read the report saying it's only 400 meters pipes. I mean, from my gateway to Joshua Corner, it's not 4 kilometers. Otherwise, I can't pay for that. So generally, well, we are applying to connect to the mains. I mean, to make site more, so tidy and easy to maintain as a high standard garden, and hopefully, yeah, that's happened. Thank you.
In addition to what Leonard said, I'd like to quickly add 3 points. The first is with regards to the infrastructure report. The report notes that at Patmos Avenue, there's issues during heavy rainfall events. For clarification, the proposed connection joins the network at Joshua Place, then connects to a waste pipe that goes down into Leith Valley, and then from Leith Valley into the city. The connection point in Leith Valley is some 700 metres downstream of Patmos Avenue. Also, the recently released second generation plans maps provide an overlay associated with infrastructure constraints. These maps show issues in all the built up areas around Dalziel Road subdivision, and I mention that just because it came up in the submissions, in the application. But the infrastructure constraints, there are none identified around the subject site in Leith Valley or North Dunedin. Now, I'm not an infrastructure engineer, and your staff have far greater information than anyone else. But these facts seem to support Leonard's proposal. The second point, returning to the subject site, Leonard has provided details on how he plans to use the site. Tourism is now and is anticipated to continue to be a major economic driver for Dunedin. We're here today to seek an enhanced outcome to a proposal that has many advantages to Dunedin. These include the direct local spend and the multiplier associated with the construction, the direct local and ongoing spend and multiplier associated with servicing the guests, and the direct local and ongoing spend and multiplier associated with what the guests actually spend in Dunedin. Combined, these will have a significant and ongoing positive impact on Dunedin's economy. This is not about an urban expansion, it's about bringing additional expenditure to our city, new expenditure. Finally, the Fluent report outlines how the infrastructure could work. The on-site works include pumps, septic tanks, collectors, and flow balancing tanks. These are substantial, and they're only possible due to the underlying future use of the site. Pumping can be managed to avoid high peak times, and if required, during periods of high rainfall. All of the substantial on-site works result in a pipe connection that is only 4 or 5 centimetres in diameter, with a flow similar to one residential dwelling. In summary, the combination of the use of the site, the economic benefits to the city, the proposed on-site infrastructure, and the anticipated outflows are indeed an exceptional circumstance. Thank you.
Just one question. You've talked about the fact that you're putting solar panels on, and I assume that part of that is around how you want to brand your experience, if you like. And I just wonder, part of the rationale that you're advancing for why this is needed is that on-site disposal would in some way impair the visitor experience. But I wonder why you wouldn't see that as actually a potential marketing positive, that along with your use of solar energy and managing all of your own waste disposal, that I would have thought could be woven into a marketing benefit rather than a negative. Is no?
That's to me, it's a sort of a technical question, to be honest. So my gut feeling is the land inside my boundary, I mean the property. So for up to 80 people stay over there, about 40 rooms, and then for certain period, I mean certain quantity of the discharges, if we do on-site, we can do that. That probably will take quite I don't know how big, but it will be quite a big area to do so. Well, if I got no other option to apply, I have to do. But if it could, I'd rather just do another option, just paying, sort of a cost in the front, and then easier to managing for later on.
Okay, so look, I may have misheard, but I thought you said it would be equivalent to one residential discharge, and you're talking about 80 people, which is.
That's the resource concerned. I mean, saying.
So which is it?
It's a lot of, it's not one residential, definitely. No. Sorry.
I'll answer that in a second if you like. Just on your first question, I think there's a substantial difference between a development that's pitching at the ecotourism market, for example, and I know that there are places that show what they do with their waste, and it's all part of the experience. This is a very high-end development, which, while it may have solar panels, it's not focused on that ecotourism market. So I hope that answers your question about this one answer. And the second question, through on-site holding tanks and the removal of sludge via truck, Fluent have estimated that the outflows would be equivalent to one domestic house.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Leonard, thank you for coming here and giving us a chance to ask questions about your project. The first one was to do with something you've already mentioned, the number of people you expect to have there. And the only indication I had from the papers we were presented with was that it was between 30 and 44 people, and that was back in May. But I take it you've changed that number upwards.
Well, all the numbers probably have to based on the whatever resource concept. Just I just have so I mean up to everything built up, it's roughly up to 40 rooms. That's why it turns up, you know, two people in the room. That's got to be based on this. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but definitely a guest accommodation is not a residential house. Yeah.
And all Fluent's work has been based on the resource consent that's already been granted.
Yeah, okay. And the other question was really following up I had was the use of the word compromise. An on-site disposal system would compromise the international visitor experience, or you just used the term visitor accommodation. And I'm struggling to see where it would compromise that. How would the visitors there be compromised by an on-site septic system?
The front of the site has about 3 paddocks, which is relatively flat. The rear of the site is more steeply sloping, and the middle of the site has quite mature trees and bush in it. The idea is that in conjunction with accommodation, there's also a show farm element. Visitors might see sheep being shorn and those types of activities, and also have the opportunity to walk around the site in between the paddocks, etc., etc. Because only the front paddock is flat, an on-site system would potentially reduce the amount of land available for guests to wander around on, and that would result in a compromised situation.
So on page 5.19, and I sat on the resource consent, but I'm sorry I can't recall the detail. It says maximum occupancy there of 44 people. That isn't the figure we need to work on, though. Page 5.19 or page 3 of 5 of the wastewater management study. Says maximum occupancy. I just can't recall the details myself, but I'm just...
That's got the right number of... That's right to me.
Yeah, so as I said, I mean, everything's got to be followed the resource content again. So just forgot whatever I'm saying, 80. So it just turns out, say 40 rooms and 80. So yeah, I didn't read this one carefully.
Yeah, it's 44 people.
Yeah, 44 people maximum, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
Just for clarity, thank you. Councillor McTavish, sorry about that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. I'm interested in the comments made, find my page again, on 5.12, just in relation to the Hearings Committee's decision, given that I also sat on the Hearings Committee. And I'm just wondering, Conrad, going back through the minutes of that hearing, they note you stating that the environmental effects of the wastewater disposal, regardless of the method, would be no more than minor. Do you stand by that statement?
Correct. The environmental effects wouldn't be no more than minor. What we're talking about here is the allocation of parts of the site for on-site disposal, restricting the ability of guests to move around the site freely.
Yeah, so there are no environmental effects. It is simply the desire of the applicant to have more amenity space for visitors.
Correct.
Yeah. And do you acknowledge that in the advice notes of that decision, it was clearly stated that the Water and Waste business unit would be in opposition to any application to connect to the wastewater system.
Yes, Chris, correct. It was made very clear, and that's why at the hearing we requested that the opportunity to have on-site disposal or to come here with this request.
Yeah. So it was clear.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Calvert.
I'm looking at 5.4 in our report today, talking about further connections. And I'm thinking that sort of the logic of the situation would suggest that we looked at, are we going to allow the whole lot, or are we not going to allow any? Because if we allow this one, it would open the door for the other ones. Because even if this one was exceptional, the other ones wouldn't be exceptional once this one was there. And that if a pipe that wouldn't service the whole lot of the new ones was put in, then that would be a sort of a bit of a nonsense if we then weren't going to do the other one. But the whole thing is, to me, awkward looking at it piecemeal. I'd rather look at sort of whether we'd be doing all of them, and if not, we'd be doing none of them, sort of then looking at them in pieces. Especially since I understand that the neighbours have signalled their intent to pursue this, so you're sort of at the front of the lead bird, and the other birds are slipstreaming, you're waiting to see what happens, but your proposal doesn't take into account them, it seems to me, sort of in the size of your pipe and other sorts of things. Wouldn't it be more useful if you, in some ways, could bring that to us as a group approach? Or
with lots of things, there's positives and minuses. I suppose it was felt that this was clearly quite a unique situation. It's a very large development, and one potential outcome would be a pipe that would not have capacity to service anyone else. Bringing in other landowners complicates the matter, and also it has a broader discussion point about the potential for subdivision. Leonard's proposal is not about subdivision, it's not about residential development, and for those reasons we thought it was better to keep it quite specific, and if the committee or the council or the staff wanted to look at a wider solution, then obviously we'd be happy to talk about that.
it does suggest, however, vesting a pipe that wouldn't be suitable for more people in the council who would end up paying to service it with only one increased connection to it.
Sorry, could you rephrase that? Or say it again, sorry.
Well, I gather the proposal is that the pipe would vest in the council at the end of the day, and
yes,
that pipe would be an unsuitable pipe if a group of people wanted to connect to it,
yes,
leaving the council with an unsuitable pipe, other people saying you let them, you ought to let us, and the cost of maintaining that, or ripping it up and putting a bigger one in, or whatever it is. It's a bit awkward, isn't it? Why would we want to take over a potentially unsuitable piece of pipe at the cost of the other ratepayers, because you guys wouldn't be paying enough to really make it worth our while to take on that length of pipe, would it? But
the length of pipe to service the one property, you mean? I'd understand that'd be user pays. Through rates, yeah, it would be user pays. I think you raise a very good point, but you have to, just because there's a pipe in the ground that's of a certain size to service a certain section, doesn't automatically say that the neighbouring properties who want to do something completely different could expect that pipe to be ripped up and enlarged.
Thank you. Going back to the disposal field being not suitable for anything else, I assume that if it was a contemporary waste system, you may very well separate the grey water from the black water. And are you absolutely sure that the disposal field could not be used for any other purpose other than a disposal field? Because I'm not an expert, but I've seen planting, I've seen grazing, I've seen lots of uses for disposal fields. In fact, there's one very close to my property.
Oh, for sure. Like, the disposal fields could be used for a variety of things. It would be a personal preference to restrict visitor access to those areas in case it wasn't a positive experience. So it would be a risk management strategy as opposed to a health strategy.
Right, so that brings me to my second question. Why would the guests even know how the waste was being disposed of if it was a modern, well-designed system? How would they even know?
No. It's it's about restricting guest access to those sites for our preference, not because. So potentially, if they had unrestricted access, you're quite right, they could walk over it and not even know. But the whole idea is to say we would restrict access in case they didn't like it or they saw something they weren't supposed to. Or something like that.
That's not what you're saying here. You talk about the conflicts arising, this is for the visitor, the compromising the international and visitor accommodation with the effects. It's nothing, what's mentioned in here is nothing to do with how you feel about it, it's how the visitors feel about it, and yet that's not the argument you're making.
No, the effects on the visitor is a restricted amount of space to wander around on.
Only because presumably the owner feels bad about it, but the visitor would apparently...
More than likely would be unaware. You're quite
unaware.
right.
So,
yeah.
So no effect.
Councillor Staines, your question's been answered. Then Richard, Councillor Thompson.
Look, this is a technical question which you may or may not be able to answer, but I'm trying to understand in terms of the amenity value of that flat land, what the difference is because in the proposed wastewater system, it says there'll be a septic tank effluent pumping system whereby a number of septic tanks on site will collect wastewater from the various accommodation units. Wastewater from each septic tank will pass through an effluent filter and then being conveyed either by gravity or by pumping to a collector and flow balancing tank. Now, what would be the difference in terms of what you require on the site to manage that process versus to manage discharge to site? What is the difference in terms of how it affects the amenity value other than this perceptual one?
How does it affect the amenity? Well, on the system, it would, and I'm not a infrastructure engineer, but I imagine it would actually be cheaper to do on-site disposal.
No, that's not really the question I'm asking. I'm trying to understand in terms of, I may have misunderstood what you said earlier. You said there's only one flat area. You would want to be able to use that for some of the attractions, yes. And that if you have to put plant on that area, you reduce the amount of area that you have available for that. I took that to mean the physical presence of things on that area, but are you saying it's not actually that there'll be visible tanks?
Oh, no.
Right.
Okay, sorry. The bulk of the infrastructure will be underground.
Okay.
And if it was on-site disposal, you would have drip lines covered in, say, wood chips surrounded by plantings.
Yep.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Connor and Leonard.